George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
All over Israel, in Akkar, in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, and in the north, Lebanese resistance rockets and drones are causing havoc and mayhem. Reports just in that the chief of staff of the Israeli military, Herzi Halevi, was killed in the successful Hezbollah drone strike, an air-to-surface missile, just in the last 5 minutes. The carnage continues in the extermination camp of Jabalia in the Gaza Strip. Mass murder and mayhem continues in the Lebanon. And we haven't even started the war proper yet, as the Americans deploy soldiers and THAAD anti-ballistic missile batteries inside Israel with scores of American soldiers to man them. It looks like the big show is coming up very, very soon. And in Britain, a mighty oak has fallen in the British political forest, dense these days, with the passing of Alex Salmond, the man who almost took Scotland to independence. We'll be talking about Kamala Harris, about Donald Trump, and about the shifting scales in the American presidential election, and at the grotesque blunder of Barack Obama emerging from his luxury homes in Martha's Vineyard to lecture the brothers that they have to support Kamala. It may have cost her the election. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours. It is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Alex Salmond was a friend of mine. We were exactly the same age. We entered the Houses of Parliament on the very same day almost 40 years ago. We disagreed on the fundamental question of separatism in Britain. Alex Salmond was the man who did more than anybody else to bring Scotland closer than it has ever been to the breakup of the British state, but we agreed on many other things. One of the last things that Alex Salmond tweeted was the eerie comparison between the unequivocal "I will stand with Israel" coming from Keir Starmer to the equally messianic, unequivocal commitment given by Tony Blair, a former Labour Prime Minister, to George W. Bush that whatever happens, we will be with you in the illegal invasion of Iraq, which turned into such a cataclysmic failure. Alex Salmond was a man of many parts, widely read, erudite in the extreme, articulate, but above all brave. He did not go with the tide. He was not a weather vane. He stood up for what he believed in, always, even in private conversations that I had with him so many times in London especially. He never once sought to elide the fundamental difference between us, but that didn't mean we couldn't be friends. In fact, the three most fulsome tributes to Alex Salmond since the sad demise in North Macedonia on Friday came from David Cameron, the former Conservative Prime Minister, the Right Honourable David Davis, a former Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party, and, if I may say so, me, yours truly. We were across the political aisle from him, but we respected him, admired the way he would disrupt the most august parliamentary occasions, like the budget, when no one else would have thought to do so, and if they had, would not have had the courage to do so. Alex Salmond was effectively crucified by his own party members. His successor, Nicola Sturgeon, and the gangrenous crew around her conspired to set up Alex Salmond on fake sex charges, on which he was acquitted by a majority female jury in front of a woman judge in the High Court in Edinburgh. But the SNP never forgave him. Although they issued condolences on the night of his demise, they had already excised him 5 years before from all and any mention on their website of the SNP. The SNP killed Alex Salmond. They contributed mightily to his death. If not for them, he might well still be alive. Indeed, if they had gotten their way, he would have died in prison, a 70-year-old man, overweight and broken. But they failed in that, and Alex was on his way to a kind of resurrection. His party, Alba, was beginning to pick up in the polls, and as can be seen from the entire Scottish media, which participated in the crucifixion of Alex Salmond, no one can deny now that he is dead that he was a major and mighty figure. A mighty oak has fallen. We shall not see the likes of him again in Scottish politics. The killing, if it is confirmed, of the Israeli chief of the defense forces, the most senior military officer in Israel, in the last few minutes, in a Hezbollah rocket strike from a drone, air-to-surface missile from a drone, first time that has ever happened, if confirmed, is also of enormous significance. Israel is used to murdering everybody else's military and political commanders. They are not used to having it happen to them in return. Indeed, the strike on the barracks of the Golani Brigade in Akkar, a town I know well but have never been in, except I've known thousands of Palestinian refugees from there, living in the refugee camps in Lebanon. Akkar is a town of some historical, biblical, and now military significance. It's far into Israel. Tel Aviv is far into Israel. Haifa is far into Israel. This war is not now being fought in the northern settlements, just across the Lebanese border. This war is not now being fought just in the southern suburbs of Beirut, in the Bekaa Valley, or in the south of Lebanon more generally. This war has been taken to the enemy. And the Lebanese resistance has shown the adeptness and determination that I predicted to you here they would deploy, notwithstanding the murder of their leader, Said Hassan Nasrallah. I told you and anyone else who would listen that the idea that killing the leader of a resistance movement as big, as resilient, and as skilled, and as weaponized as the Lebanese resistance was for the birds. I told you that the Lebanese resistance would now fight with renewed vigor and with messianic zeal, for the word Hezbollah means party of God. They believe that they are the party of God, the army of God. They believe that if they fall in this conflict with Israel, that they are going immediately to a better place. No need for the day of judgment. They believe that they are now in heaven when they fall. So the idea that the conscripts of the Israeli army, the beachnicks of the Israeli army, the New Yorkers, Parisians, Londoners, and others who went there for a land of milk and honey, to take someone else's land, to take someone else's house, were ever going to prevail against a determined army fighting to defend its own land, is equally for the birds. With their headphones on and their TikTok dances done, the Israeli army doesn't want to be there, and it will want to be there even less now that they know that in their rear areas, like Akkar, far away from the front line, that so many of them could be killed and injured. The helicopters are chopping through the skies right now all over Israel, taking the dead and the wounded to hospital and to the morgue. And in the battlefield proper itself, in the south of Lebanon, Israel has not advanced more than 100 meters. Not one town has been taken by the invading Israeli army. Sure, they can deal out death and destruction from the air. That's what they are good at, and they are doing so. In significant numbers, the people of Lebanon are falling. But not quite as significant as in a refugee camp I have known, it seems, it feels, all of my life. The camp of Jabalia was where I saw border guards, Druze Israeli border guards, forcing Palestinian women to clean the street with toothbrushes. That's right, with basins of soapy water and toothbrushes. I watched them as they forced these women on all fours to clean the street of the camp with toothbrushes. I watched them with an official of the United Nations. The United Nations, which is now all but destroyed by the country which was given birth by the United Nations. That's right, Israel came into being as a result of a resolution of the United Nations, since when they have killed the United Nations Special Envoy, Count Bernadotte of Sweden. They have murdered hundreds of United Nations officials. They have been caught on camera announcing that they would like to destroy the United Nations building in New York. They have bombed and obliterated the United Nations buildings in Gaza and in Lebanon. They are destroying schools. They are destroying United Nations medical facilities. They are destroying food warehouses with the wherewithal to keep the captives in the extermination camp alive. And yet, no matter how many United Nations officials they kill, they are still allowed to sit in the United Nations. I say to the Secretary General, Mr. Gutierrez, if he's a man at all, he will tomorrow move the expulsion of Israel from the United Nations itself. It is surely intolerable, unconscionable, that the country which was brought into being by the institution whose people they now murder should be allowed to continue to sit there. They are, of course, now responsible for the wounding of 5 United Nations peacekeeping soldiers from Indonesia, from Ireland, from Ghana, and from other places. Netanyahu has demanded that the United Nations force in Lebanon of peacekeeping forces, brave men and women, who are there to monitor the ceasefires long non-existent. They are there fulfilling their international duty. Their property and their lives are sacrosanct to the international community. Israel is shooting them, shelling them, and ramming them with tanks. Well, if Gutierrez and the UN put up with this, they'll put up with anything. I'm going to repeat something I asked earlier in the week. If the United Nations cannot find it within itself, given the United States veto, to send under Chapter 11 a force, a fighting force, to keep the peace on the Lebanese border, to protect the civilians on the Lebanese border, to protect their own soldiers on the Lebanese border, then someone else must step forward to do so. After all, that's what Clinton and Tony Blair did in what they call Kosovo, wasn't it? They declared that while the UN would not sanction it, they had a duty, indeed they had a right to protect. RTP, they called it. It was founded on the Chicago Doctrine, a doctrine which Blair enunciated eponymously in the city of Chicago. He said that member states of the United Nations where no consensus could be reached in the UN, had a right to move into other people's countries to protect them from aggression. If there's not a case for doing that right now in southern Lebanon, I have no idea why not. Turkey, which talks big, although in the last hour it said it's setting up a Farsi section of its broadcasting arm, TRT, and we are going to disrupt Iran, said the spokesman for TRT. Well, good luck. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. I'm not against anybody setting up stations. I've done so myself and will do so again. But it is ironic that the tough-talking Turkish President Erdogan is about to set up a TV station to beam into Iran, presumably to foment unrest and discontent there, is still supplying 40% of Israel's war machine's oil across Turkish territory from Turkish satrap Azerbaijan, from Turkey's agent Azerbaijan, about which more later. It's ironic that Turkey is still trading with Israel as it massacres the refugees in the extermination camps of Gaza, yet is preparing to do broadcasting battle with Iran. The slaughter in Gaza has reached unimaginable proportions. It is quite clear that a genocide within a genocide is now taking place. In northern Gaza, the people have a choice to leave or be exterminated. The problem is, these people have all left so many times before, and every time they leave, they're killed as they leave. They're killed the place to which they have left, and now they are being killed back in their own hovels in the camps of northern Gaza. And tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of them. There's almost 400,000 people in northern Gaza right now, starving, being shelled, bombed, strafed, and being subject to unremitting, unrelenting assault in the darkness, with absolutely nobody doing anything about it. Nobody even covering the genocide within the genocide that is going on. It appears, and I hesitate to use this phrase, that the state of Israel is bent upon a final solution in Gaza. And just like the Western countries that did nothing to stop Hitler's final solution until the Red Army liberated the surviving inmates in the extermination camps of Nazi Germany, the Western countries are again going to turn their faces away. Much more of all of that later. I mentioned Azerbaijan. Their leader is going to the BRICS summit. I hope to interview him. I'll be approaching him in any case with a microphone, as I will approach everybody that I see who might have something important to say to the audience of MOATS. Gayatri and I leave for there in the next day or two, and we will seek to bring you the best of the BRICS from Kazan, capital of Tatarstan, within the Russian Federation. It is one of the most important international conferences of modern times. It will set the course for the future, a future which you will live. In the 3 minutes still available to me in this monologue, I have to turn to Bathhouse Barry Obama. He's been known as many things, by many things, but he clearly thinks he is the Messiah. He clearly thinks he rules the black community in the United States, even though he did absolutely nothing for them. And he was out there on a nationwide tour. He's now been joined by Bill Clinton. How's that for a travelling Wilburys? If I can, forgive me, George, desecrate that name. The travelling Wilburys, Barry Obama and Billy Clinton. It's like the Epstein set all over again. And they're lecturing other people on ethics. They're lecturing other people on Donald Trump's moral foibles and failures. They're saying that cackling Kamala Harris must get over the line, and they are dismayed that black men in particular are simply not rallying towards her. Well, they only have themselves to blame. They pushed out the senile bath chair President Joe Biden. Anyone seen or heard from him of late? Is he running the war? Is he going to run the upcoming war with Iran? Is that the plan? That General Joe Biden will lead the troops into battle? No. They pushed him over a cliff and they imposed a woman intellectually completely bereft, a woman with no popularity, a woman with no class, a chameleon. She has simply not cut through the US electorate, whilst being co-responsible for a series of policies, foreign policies, which are murdering the family members of the very people that she needs to win in the election in November. I predicted to you last week that Jill Stein, Dr. Jill Stein, will win the state of Michigan, or at least will defeat Kamala Harris there. I'm doubling down on that prediction. This is, after all, the mother of all talk shows. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. Who will be the next US president? That's our poll this evening. Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, which appears to have been hijacked for the purposes of this vote, because so different is the result there to everywhere else. Who will be the next US president? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? You can vote on my Twitter, on my X, and congratulations to Elon Musk for pulling off the most significant engineering feat of the 21st century so far. His rocket coming back directly to land on its launch pad is truly a momentous achievement. Congratulations to all the engineers, scientists, and to Mr. Musk for that extraordinary feat, which I marveled at just before the show. That really is a thing of beauty, and thus a joy forever. You can vote on the YouTube community poll. You can vote on the YouTube stream. 22,754 people have voted so far. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland, 08 08196 5522, and you can call from anywhere else in the world on 0044 203 966 2625. Garland Nixon is the coolest of our correspondents across the pond, radio talk show host and political analyst supreme, and a very popular mother of all talk shows guest regularly. Garland, welcome back to the show. We're getting close to the witching hour, no pun intended. Although the witches are out, I see. Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. Seems to have backfired, Barack Obama's lecture to the black men of America. What say you as one of those?
Oh, absolutely. It's Barack Obama's attempt to coerce black men to vote for Kamala Harris isn't having any effect, and the main reason is because the people that happen to be black, that are working class people that choose not to vote for Kamala Harris. Overall, it's because of economic policy. It's because they look at their situation deteriorating over the last 4 years, and obviously they feel that to continue 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration is not going to be in their best interest. Now, Barack Obama coming out and admonishing them and telling them that they have to vote for someone who is, only capable of incoherent babbling when asked a specific question, it's just not going to move the dial now. It demonstrates the desperation and the hollowness of the Democratic Party, that they can't come forward with any policy-based solutions to convince their voters. So they either just go with she's a woman, or they shake the finger at voters and tell them it's their responsibility to put her in office for who knows what reason.
I watched, admittedly it's from 2016, and he's changed his tune now, but I watched Michael Moore's epic monologue about why Donald Trump was going to win the election in 2016. He talked about the working class stiffs who are going to use Donald Trump as a human Molotov cocktail to throw at the system which has failed them. If it had failed them by 2016, it's equally failing them now. Why wouldn't the workers of Michigan, of Wisconsin, of Pennsylvania, why wouldn't the black and Latino populations trapped in poverty and subject to racism in your country, why wouldn't they use Donald Trump again as a human Molotov cocktail?
Well, I agree with that, but I think there's another dynamic in effect here, and that is that Donald Trump has a body of work for 4 years. So as the Democrats tell us, literally, they are saying things like, if Donald Trump gets in, you'll be back to slavery, or we'll be back in some kind of a apartheid situation. A lot of fear mongering. Here's the fact, and I hear this in the black community. We already know what it's like to deal with the Donald Trump presidency for 4 years. And whether he wanted to or not, he didn't do anything all of that outrageous, number one. Number two, now, we can have a discussion as to whether it's Donald Trump's fault or not. The economy was better. Inflation was better. And it's going to be hard to convince people who felt that their economic situation was materially better under Donald Trump that he's some kind of a threat to them. It's just not working. So what you're going to see is people who wouldn't vote for Donald Trump in the black community, a lot of them are staying home. And those a lot of people are leaving the Democratic Party and going to Trump saying, you know what, I don't care. I've heard people say this. I don't care if he is a racist. I don't care what he is. I just want to go back to a time when it was better, and maybe that'll work. I personally don't really feel that it will. I have other issues related to war and peace that I could discuss as to who would be, better for the survival of humankind. But to convince people who, after COVID, 40% of all black businesses closed under COVID, and to convince them that they would be better off to continue with this, I just don't think that's going to hold water.
We'll come to those international questions, but if you'll allow me, I'll take you down ticket a bit. First of all, the two vice presidential candidates, basically unknown here in Britain and I suspect in the rest of the world, looks to me that J.D. Vance is proving considerably more of an asset to Trump than Walz is proving to Harris. What do you say?
Absolutely. And part of it is the Democrats' fault. One of the things that they tried to do is, Donald Trump is insane and the Republicans are madmen, and anyone who would be aligned with Trump is absolutely insane. So they set a standard where J.D. Vance was supposed to be, present himself as some kind of a deranged madman. There was a the debate, and J.D. Vance came across as a fairly intelligent politician. You may disagree with his policies or agree with his policies, but he didn't meet the standards of deranged madman, and that hurt. That definitely hurt the Democrats, and particularly a few questions that were asked to potential VP Walz. He didn't do a good job with them, so I think he struggled a bit. Vance seemed a bit more smooth, and I think that was very a significant help, a boost for the Trump campaign.
I thought it was liberal heaven at the weekend when Walz went on a pheasant shoot, but there were no guns in evidence and no pheasants were shot. No pheasants were harmed in the making of this infomercial. I thought that was the ultimate. What about the other races? How significant are they going to turn out to be? Are you looking at this stage at any change in the balance in the Senate, in the House? The coattails of Donald Trump, they're likely to pull anybody else in with them?
You know, one of the things about Trump voters, and I'll say this particularly in the black community, is Donald Trump tends to outperform the polls, because if you ask a lot of people, will you vote for Donald Trump, they're going to say no, but they'll vote for him. Particularly in the black community, people, oh no, I'm not voting for Trump. But you know, when they get in there and it's time to make a choice, a lot of them are. So I think that Donald Trump's coattails will be significant. I do think that at this point, the Senate's going to turn over. There's a significant race in Montana. It looks like I believe that the Senate, if I had to bet again, I would think that the Republicans will have the House and the Senate going into, coming out of November. And I would predict Donald Trump winning. Another thing that's important, and this is something to an indicator. You know, the polls externally, you can't never ever, if you ever knew people that were pollers, which I have, that ran these polls, you know, you can only trust them but so much. But internally, one of the things that the Democrats are doing now is spending a lot of millions of dollars to go after Jill Stein, to have negative advertisements against Jill Stein. That tells us that they're horrified that Jill Stein's going to, I'll say Jill Stein is going to cost them election. In reality, what it means is that the Muslims, the Abandon Harris, which is a Muslim-led group, has endorsed Jill Stein. They're horrified that they're going to lose the Muslim vote, particularly in the Midwest, and that's going to cost them the election. And I just think they're losing so many of their traditional demographics. They're leaning so hard into this Liz Cheney, and of course, we're going to go hunting to think somehow they're going to get the Republicans just because they're out, doing an unarmed pheasant hunt, figure that out. But I just think the indicators are that they're in deep and serious trouble, and they're horrified at what's about to happen. And I think they're right.
Yes. Now let's turn to the international questions that you alluded to. You are now, I just watched, or listened rather, to a documentary on the Vietnam War, how it started, the American involvement, rather, in the Vietnam War. Started with weapons and the people to operate them, advisors. I see that just of this weekend, the US is sending armed forces with THAAD anti-ballistic missile batteries into Israel. America now has invested heavily in defending Netanyahu, even though Netanyahu has humiliated the US President Joe Biden at every turn. They're doubling down. If the big shooting war starts, it's pretty big already, but if Israel attacks Iran and Iran responds with a mega attack on Israel, as they are pledged to do, the US is very, very firmly in the firing line. Do the American people know that? Do they approve of it?
You know, I think that right now the American people are struggling internally right now economically. We've been hit with major natural disasters, a series of hurricanes. There is I think one of the big problems that the U.S. Leadership would have if they got involved in a major military conflict right now is that people are pretty much screaming, why is all this money going to Israel? Why is all this money going to Ukraine? As we see, disasters throughout Western throughout the southern part of the country. So they're going to have a real difficulty getting support on any military conflicts right now when people are upset because they feel as though the government is not properly responding to the needs of the American people at home. So anything they get involved with is going to end up with major pushback. The Democratic Party, particularly when their entire left flank is unhappy with the Israeli conflict, and even people who support that are certainly unhappy with the financial situation regarding federal emergency management assistance to people in need.
Let's finish on the Ukraine, Garland. I would much prefer Trump to Harris, although my support from the beginning has been with Dr. Jill Stein, a friend of mine. I hope she does really well. I hope she gets 5%. I hope she gets the matching funds, and that it's the beginning of a new story in American politics. But of the big two, I much prefer Trump to Harris for two reasons. First of all, even a stop clock is right twice a day, and Donald Trump might be right twice a day. And the one thing on which he's virtually certain to be right is that he will stop the war in Ukraine. He will not go into World War III against Russia over the dead bodies of the Ukrainian and Russian peoples. That's a big prize. If I'm right in that judgment, it's actually more important than almost anything else. What's your take?
I agree, because the Ukraine conflict can't be viewed independently of the neocon move to go after China. Let's not forget, this was about the Zbigniew Brzezinski and the Wolfowitz doctrine that said no other world power can arise, particularly in the Eurasian region, that could challenge U.S. hegemony, U.S. supremacy. So if, in fact, they have to exercise what I've said from all along, that eventually the U.S. will exercise what I call the Samsonite option when it comes to Ukraine, they will pack their bags and walk away. But when that happens, it makes it very difficult, or I might say impossible, to continue with, we're going to weaken Russia and then go after China, because you've strengthened Russia and you've brought Russia and China closer together, which makes it more difficult for the neocon plan to separate China, to isolate China and go after China. So whether or not Donald Trump can be successful in doing that, I don't know, but I do believe that Donald Trump would try to, I think that he would make some efforts to stop the Ukraine conflict. You know, Donald Trump has made a lot of statements about he wants to even turn down the volume in the Middle East, that he wants the peace to be the peace president. And now he comes out and then he sticks his foot in his mouth about Iran every now and then. But, you know, the fact that he has a few people around him, maybe a Tulsi Gabbard, an RFK Jr., that, again, we have our issues with. But you can't have all meat and no gravy, as they say. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of people that feel like you. As far as the survival of mankind, Donald Trump might be the more palatable option.
Gayatri and I are going to Kazan for the BRICS in a day or two. I was looking at the list of heads of state and heads of government that are attending the BRICS in Russia. And it really is impressive, Garland. Everyone from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to the President of Venezuela and Nicaragua, the President of Cuba, the leader of China, Xi Jinping, people that you would expect and people that you wouldn't expect. It looks rather like the future to me. What about you?
Absolutely. And a couple of big things that are going on at the BRICS. One, they're apparently going to come up with some kind of a plan. It's believed that's going to allow countries to do business with each other without using the U.S. dominated international economic infrastructure, which is powerful. President Putin of Russia has apparently said that he wants some kind of an amendment in their paperwork that says that no member of BRICS can be exercise sanctions against other members of BRICS. Well, if in fact that occurs, it completely changes the landscape. When you bring in a Venezuela, you bring in a Cuba, and now Algeria, Saudi Arabia, major countries now will not be forced, will make a choice to go around U.S. sanctions. The U.S. will have to make a decision. Are we just going to sanction everybody, which will mean we're sanctioning ourselves and the Europeans out of business? So I think that the world realizes that economics is turning towards the global south, and the U.S. has no one to blame but itself.
Always a pleasure. Garland Nixon, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. The poll is now showing 74, 77, 79% who believe Donald Trump will be the next U.S. president. Kamala Harris, 26, 23, and 21. 23,803 people have voted, and you have got an hour or so to get your vote in. Let me take a quick break, then it's your calls all the way to the hour. Stay tuned. Even though it has moved its mass murder campaign from Gaza, although there's still mass murdering in Gaza, of course, no day off for the poor refugees in the concentration camp of Gaza, but they have moved their killing fields to Lebanon. Lebanon, a sovereign country. Lebanon, a member of the United Nations. Lebanon, a country to which every other country in the world has diplomatic relations, has ambassadors in place, is being remorselessly bombed with hundreds and hundreds of air attacks, killing hundreds and hundreds of people every day, most of them women and children. Was it ever thus? As I said the other night, put the letter H in front of any Arab child and you can slaughter them with impunity. Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, they all look the same. They all are deserving of death, violent, sudden death, delivered from American airplanes, using American missiles and bombs, with British airplanes supplying the targeting information and the offending American and British reconnaissance flights flying out of somebody else's country, namely Cyprus, and the British sovereign base there.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to California. Who wouldn't? Where Josh wants to talk about nuclear weapons. Welcome, Josh. What's on your mind?
Hello, George. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm from a place called the Coachella Valley. Thank you. I'm from a place called the Coachella Valley.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, which, as I understand it, is one of the oldest nuke holes in the United States, which is to say it's a place where they've been experimenting with critical masses of uranium, likely since the 19th century, and some speculate that it was one such experiment that set a lithium fire that caused them to have to reroute the Colorado River to put out that fire and form the Salton Sea. So this is a place where they do nuclear experiments because it's a valley. Fallout from outside can't get in, and fallout from inside blows out through a wind corridor. So it's a very safe place to get nuked. It's one of the safest places to get nuked in the United States. That having been said, having lived here for over 40 years, I seem to have some recollections that they've been experimenting with a new type of nuclear weapon out here. And I'm afraid it's a quantum inversion device, a singularity generator. From what I've been able to gather,
tell us more.
So what I've been able to gather is that Einstein had a closer bead on the grand unification theory than he let on, because he didn't want people to develop a quantum inversion device. What the quantum inversion device does is it uses a laser array to stop an electron from spinning, causing it to invert, causing a singularity. And the science behind this is that there is a quantum, I know this may sound funny, there is a quantum material spectrum at the extremity of relativity, which is to say as objects start moving extremely fast or become extremely small, they experience acceleration in different ways, that there's quantum acceleration that occurs as physical reality breaks down as matter approaches the speed of light. But this quantum inversion device creates a singularity, which creates an extremely strong gravitational pull, and then it spits out basically a periodic table's worth of poisonous fallout, as well as antiparticles and anything that comes out of essentially the birth of the universe, and then creates an anti-gravity field that literally throws people, the gravitational field will lift people off the ground, and then the anti-gravitational field will throw people to the ground. This is what I remember experiencing and seeing, and what seems to comport with other people who, though they may be reluctant to speak about it directly, have no problem alluding to it in their art or in their political speeches, etc.
Well, I told you it was the Global University of the Airwaves. If you understood any of that, you're a better man than me, Gunga Din. Now, look, it's been a big week for us on the podcast. We're in the top 20 in South Korea this week, which is a first there. We are number 4 in Saudi Arabia, number 8 in Hong Kong, number 1 in Malaysia, and we are the number 1 English-speaking political podcast in Lebanon on Apple Podcasts. We're even charting in Israel. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. Let's go to Pennsylvania, a swing state if ever there was one, and hear from William. Go ahead, William.
Mr. Galloway, are you there?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Yeah, the whole
Mr.
world
Galloway,
is listening. Go ahead.
What an honor. What a pleasure to talk to you. What a crazy, crazy world, huh? I'll tell you what, I live here in the capital of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, and fortunately we haven't been caught up in a lot of this big city stuff. But I just wanted to say one thing. I studied history back in the 70s at my local community college, and I was taught an entirely different thing about our form of government. I was taught we were a constitutional republic, and that Jefferson, Hamilton, Franklin said a democracy would be a tragedy, that when 51% would govern 49%, it would not end up well. Why do I not see anyone on TV teaching real history, even about your own country? I've studied a lot about your own country, and it's fascinating that people twist and lie. I don't get it. I don't get it. What are we going to do, Mr. Galloway?
Well, it's a very interesting observation, William. They say that journalism is the first draft of history, but the second draft, which is history, is written by exactly the same people or the same kind of people as wrote the journalism. You can only conclude that the history imbibed or consumed by the majority in any country is the history that your rulers want you to believe. And there's a complete inversion on many, many important aspects. Israel-Palestine is one of them. You would think that the Palestinians were the aggressors. You'd think that the Palestinians were the terrorists. You'd think that the Israelis were the victims of terrorism, that their land was being taken from them, if you believe both the first and the second drafts of history, when, of course, the precise opposite is the case. There's a video I've seen, I've now watched it several times, of President Truman discussing the dangers of giving Palestine to the Zionists. It's a talk. It's like a TED talk by President Harry Truman whilst in office. I commend it to you. It is absolutely eye-opening and absolutely different to the way in which this issue is covered today. I watched last night, because my sons are all now at school studying the Second World War, I watched some important documentaries on Netflix yesterday and had to explain them to my sons. And a number of things, I tweeted about it last night, you can check it out, a number of things that have passed into oblivion were immediately obvious to the perspicacious viewer of their own Western documentaries. The first was how utterly the European powers folded like a cheap tent in front of Hitler's advance. How stoic were the British when they stood alone under the Battle of Britain, under the Blitz, and with Hitler's forces at the Channel ports looking at the white cliffs of Dover through binoculars, waiting for the tide to be right, waiting for air superiority to be established by the Luftwaffe. But the Air Force, the Royal Air Force, just 1,000 pilots, that's all, of a staggeringly young age, 19, 20, 21, 1,000 people. These were the people Churchill referred to as the few when he said, never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few. 1,000 pilots defeated the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, caused the postponement of Hitler's plans to invade this country, and made him turn instead to Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the USSR, which was the beginning of the end. Tens of millions of deaths later of fascism, of Nazism, of Hitler himself. Another thing that has completely departed from popular consciousness is that it was the Russians that won the war. We stood alone. If we had not stood alone, the Americans would never have entered the war. If we had capitulated, the Americans would never have entered the war. The Japanese would never have needed to attack Pearl Harbor. So we played a very, very important role that no one can ever take away from us. But 86% of the casualties of the Nazi forces, the Wehrmacht, were inflicted by the Red Army, not G.I. Joe, not Tommy Atkins, but Boris of the Russian Red Army. 86% of German casualties were inflicted by the Russians. And do you know who came second in that illustrious league table? Do you know who took the second highest number of Nazi casualties? Yugoslavia. Now, hasn't that factoid been forgotten? Thank you, William. Elenian71 says, Israel has successfully isolated itself. Its stupid, evil ego has consumed its very existence. We are all accused of anti-Semitism, but we are the true soldiers of the Lord. And Paul Meany says, in the name of God, how many more Palestinian and Lebanese genocide and Holocaust victims must die in this savage US, EU, NATO, Israeli-backed genocide against humanity? And James Klugman, great name, says the stolen Syrian oil goes through Turkey to Israel, pennies on the dollar. Let's go to Derby in England and talk to Callie about Israel. Go ahead.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly. Go ahead.
Yeah, about a month ago, you had a poll on who did, do you believe the official story of 9/11? You remember?
Yeah.
And was it like 85, 90, 95% of people said they'd don't believe it?
I don't remember the number, but it was definitely a majority of people didn't believe it. Yeah.
Who do you think did it? From AS?
Well, look, this is not on the agenda tonight. I am absolutely certain that the official story is false. I don't have the time or the inclination right now to branch out into who might have done it and why. I believe the story is false. I believe that there needs to be a new 9/11 inquiry. I hope that Donald Trump will order one. He is a New Yorker, after all. Kelly, last point to you.
Donald Trump will never, ever order an investigation into it. Never. The people who pulled it off are in charge of him. Come on. Let's get real. If we want to talk about that monstrous state, the chosen people, let's talk about who did 9/11 and killed the Kennedys. Thank you.
Okay, that was succinct, pursed even. Monkey Boy says, George, are you worried about being dragged off the plane on your return to the UK? Yeah, do I look worried? Walter is in Blackpool. He's always worth hearing. Walter, welcome back. Go ahead. Walter, are you there? Walter, calling Walter in Blackpool. Okay, let's forget him for the moment. Who will be the next US president? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? You can vote on the Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. So far, Donald Trump is running away with it. Almost 24,000 people have voted so far. Ben Johnson says, faced with a choice between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, I choose Giant Meteor 2024. Let's just end it. Very good, Ben. And Dick's Studios says, I think Trump will win, but Harris will actually be president. Do explain, Dick. James Hayden says, I supported Trump twice, and now that he wants to attack Iran, I'm done. Talib Edu says, David Lammy, Foreign Secretary, stops Nelson Mandela's son from entering the UK. Shame on the UK. That's probably the lowest point yet. David Lammy, the United Kingdom, banning Nelson Mandela's grandson from Britain on the day they welcomed little Zelensky to pick our pockets again. Paul Meany says the so-called free speech Western regimes couldn't tolerate Alex Salmond speaking openly and freely on a Russian internationally renowned news network, so they had to ruin his life. Shame on the SNP. And Sylvia Frost says the Irish UN peacekeeping forces told the IOF to stick it where the sun don't shine. God bless Ireland. Simon is in London on Trump. Go ahead, Simon.
How you doing, George? Hope you're well, mate. Listen, with regards to the United States
Yes,
election,
good.
some people, including myself, wish that Trump was in power because, of course, he'd stop the Ukraine war. But recently, I found the irony of this very laughable. I find it ironic because people think he's a safe pair of hands, but very soon he's going to be just as senile as Joe Biden was. You know, if Trump does come into power later this year and gets elected, becomes the president-elect this year and becomes president next year, you know, in 4 years' time, he'll be just as old as Biden, probably just as senile as Biden. And we're still seeing signs of this from Trump. In the last debate, it was very, very evident. And remember, the overthrow of Ukraine's democratically elected government occurred in 2014. And between then and today, the United States Congress and the CIA have been providing weapons and money to Ukraine in order to provoke Russia, you know. And a lot of this, between 2017 and 2020, was done during when Trump was in office, you know. And while he's suggesting that he'll end the war, you know, the man's an idiot, because it's not just a simple case of making phone calls to his friend Zelensky and his friend, although I don't think Putin views him to be a friend, because Putin's a clever guy. I don't think it'll be as simple as that. For starters, there's a lot of things like there's been a lot of weapons contracts being signed by various countries, including our own, and that creates a bubble, effectively, And when you want to end the war, you need to end that bubble. It's not going to be a simple matter of just ending that bubble and saying, okay, we'll stop the entire weapons. Victoria Nuland herself basically said quite recently that a lot of the money that goes to Ukraine ends up going to fund the United States arms industry, No president. Remember, the Republicans are the war party in the United States Congress, Even though Democrats are no different, the Republicans are staunch war, especially the neocons in that element of the party. They just want war no matter what. And not only that, they will not take it kindly, and they will not take it well if Trump just suddenly ended the war in one day by making a simple phone call, I don't think that'll happen, So it's just not, not realistic.
It's a very good call and some very challenging points made. The war will not be ended in one day. But in one day, it will cease to escalate. Trump doesn't need congressional approval for that. He will, if not slam on the brakes, take his foot off the escalator. And that will be enough to be going on with. If Harris wins, the accelerator will be pressed. The war will escalate and might spiral into World War III. So that's pretty big prize. I'm second to no man in recognizing the weaknesses of Donald Trump. That's why I could never vote for him. But I hope that he is the president rather than Kamala Harris, and I think you hope the same, and for the same reason. But I'm intrigued at your idea that being old equals being senile. It does not at all. Alex Salmond was 70, I'm 70. Neither of us was remotely senile. My mother is almost 90. She's not remotely senile. There are people in their 50s who are senile. Early onset Alzheimer's affects people in much earlier age than mine. So it's not a given that Donald Trump will become senile. And I myself have not seen any signs of senility in him, including in the debate that you quote. I do believe he was less, if you like, venomous than he might have been, was against Joe Biden. That may have been because of a phenomenon first identified by Neil Kinnock when he was up against Margaret Thatcher across the dispatch box, that for men of a certain age in particular, it's quite difficult to be venomously attacking a woman. The reasons, I don't know, but I haven't seen any signs that Donald Trump is senile, and I haven't seen any indication that if he wins in November, by the end of his term, that he will be in that condition. He seems to me physically and mentally in vastly better shape than Joe Biden, and mentally in vastly better shape than Kamala Harris. Look, let's take a break. We've got Professor Asad Abukhalil, the professor of California State University, author and political commentator on the Middle East, on Lebanon, on Palestine, on Iran, coming up right after this short break. Stay tuned. Well, first of all, Bob Geldof and his good friend Bono are on the other side. It wasn't for South Africa, it was for the Horn of Africa. I was involved in it at the time. That was my job at the time. And there were many differences. First of all, it was easy because of Cold War politics to take a stand on the famine in sub-Saharan Africa in 1984-85. I did so myself, but it was easy to do. There was no Ethiopian lobby smearing you as an anti-Ethiopian racist if you got involved in it. There was absolutely gale force wind of free publicity from the newspapers and the television about the famine in Africa at that time. There is zero publicity in the mainstream media about the calvary being undergone by the Palestinian people in 2024. Thirdly, the artists involved lost nothing and arguably gained much by being involved in that charitable enterprise. Artists today lining up for Palestine, like the great Eric Clapton, like the great Roger Waters, and I'm running out of names already, would not only not be benefiting from putting on a Live Aid for Palestine, their careers would be destroyed, would be brought to a shuddering halt if they did. So I'm afraid none of the conditions which made possible the Live Aid phenomenon exist over Palestine. Indeed, quite the contrary.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, 25,000 people have voted, and Donald Trump so far has got the gig. Let's see what Professor Asad Abukhalil, a former guest of ours and a most impressive professor at California State University. He's an author and a political commentator, and he's with us now. Before turning to the Middle East professor, let's deal with the American election first. On the face of it, it seems like it's Zion Don against Genocide Joe and his surrogate, cackling Kamala Harris. Both of them entirely in thrall to the Israel lobby. But most of the Jewish people in the United States will not be voting for Donald Trump. The Zionist evangelical Christians will be voting for Donald Trump. So it's a bit more complicated than at first it appears, isn't it? The only reason I prefer Trump to Harris is I already know what Harris is doing right now to the Middle East. I don't need to look in the crystal ball to see what Donald Trump might do. What's your stance on that?
Well, I mean, firstly, I've been here since 1983 and I never voted because I knew I was going to be disappointed and that the people I'll vote for, Republican or Democrat, are going to do something really bad in terms of social justice here in the United States or in the Middle East in particular. In the case you're mentioning, you're absolutely right. We should hold responsible for the genocide going on and the war of aggression against 7 countries. I mean, Israel is now launching wars against 7 countries. We have to hold responsible the Biden, Harris, and the Blinken administration. They are solely responsible. That does not mean that Donald Trump is going to bring about a radical change in American foreign policy in the Middle East. His record in the Middle East was absolutely bad, but he did not initiate or sponsor a variety of wars as we have seen with this administration. And you're right in your earlier remark. I mean, this administration have brought the world to the brink of nuclear disasters in the Ukraine as well as in the Middle East. But to pin a hope on any of these two parties, I think, would ignore a long record of consensus about Israel and its interests within the ruling elite of the United States.
Amen. Let's turn to the 7 countries you alluded to. Both of them on the borders of Israel are proving more than capable of fighting back. Even the destroyed Gaza Strip is still fighting back, still taking its toll of the invasion forces. But the Lebanese resistance would appear not to have been cowed in any way by the killing of their leader, Hassan Nasrallah. The skill of the Lebanese resistance and the toll that it's taking on the Israeli invaders is really quite spectacular when you think about it. Is that going to cause any second thoughts in Tel Aviv, do you think?
I think it all depends on the Americans. The Americans have basically unconditionally supported all aggression and genocide by Israel. But what you're saying is true. The resilience and the courage of the resistance against Israel is a story that's going to be told for many generations. We're talking about stories like the Viet Cong, and it's all because there's a quest of justice that cannot be smashed by military force. Israel at a crisis today. I mean, just last week, new recording of a cabinet meeting with Golda Meir was released in the Israeli press. In it, she says, whenever Arabs are no more afraid of us, we are finished. Well, I wish I can tell Golda Meir now that you are finished because Arabs are not afraid of you. I mean, look what happened in Gaza with all the genocide. They are not surrendering. And there is no way that the people of Lebanon are going to surrender or the resistance is going to surrender. I mean, we now are discovering that Hezbollah is bigger than a movement that is all controlled by Hassan Nasrallah or by Iran or anything like that. It's a mass movement. It is by people who are rooted in the land of Lebanon, and they are fighting for their liberation and for their dignity, the way they have been fighting Israeli occupation since the 1980s. And George, our story with Israel preceded the creation of Hamas, preceded the creation of Hezbollah, preceded the creation of the PLO. Arabs have been intimidated and brutalized by the state of Israel before even the state was established in 1948. Since the 1930s, Zionist gangs in Palestine resorted to the most dastardly acts of terrorism against the native. They realized that they will not submit, so we will use massive force. But this is the dilemma of the Zionist entity, which is no matter how much force they use, they have been using force for over a century. And the native population is not cowering in. They are not submitting to the wishes of the occupiers. And they will continue to fight, and eventually they'll be victorious. I mean, it is not poetry. It's what's happening in the ground. Despite all these attacks on Lebanon, in Beirut and the suburbs and South Lebanon, they are destroying villages wholesale. Look what they have done in Gaza. And yet, the people are still fighting, and they will continue to fight. And this is why the Zionist project is doomed. It cannot continue. And the only thing that's keeping it alive today is the United States and its coterie of subservient allies in NATO Europe.
Well, I suppose the obvious question is why? Why is the United States and its vassals in Europe, why are we reinforcing failure? Why are we doubling down on something that is destroying the soft power of our countries, making people hate us all over the world, as well as drastically reducing our chances of entry into heaven if and when the judgment day comes? Why, Professor? Why?
Well, I mean, there's no question there are many reasons for that. I mean, there are historical reasons having to do with the Holocaust and the feeling that the American establishment did nothing. Actually, FDR did not allow more than 3,000 refugees in 1943 to come into the United States while they were calling for unlimited immigration to Palestine. I mean, they wanted the Jews to go over there, but not into their own land in Europe. And as you know, most of the Zionist champions, including Lord Balfour, were unabashed anti-Semites. So in the United States, there has been the feeling during the Cold War that Israel can do the dirty work of the United States, and it has done so. I mean, if you think of every civil war in the Middle East in my lifetime, Israel was doing the dirty work with the United States or on the part of the United States. I mean, the civil war in Sudan, the Sahara conflict, the civil war in Lebanon, the events of September 1970 in Jordan, Oman rebellion in 1970s, all these events, and of course in northern Iraq with the Kurds. Israel has been involved in all that. But what America is realizing now is that the argument that we need to give them all these unlimited supply of weapons and all these tens of billions of dollars in order that we don't have to go over there and deploy troops is not working anymore, right? I mean, Israel has proven in this conflict against two non-armies, namely Hamas and Hezbollah, they cannot defend themselves by themselves. I mean, Israel today requires the assistance, the military assistance directly of the United States, of Germany, of France, of Britain and of a coterie of Arab countries because it can't stand on its feet. I mean, if you leave Israel to the natives, I think they can give it a good beating, as they are doing right now.
Now, of course, the world waits for an Israeli attack on Iran, which may turn out, well, it may not happen. It may turn out to be purely performative, or it may turn out to be the beginning of an all-out war, which may very well quickly involve the superpowers and could develop into a nuclear exchange. What's your view on what is going to happen next between Israel and Iran?
I think with Biden in the White House, anything could happen. That man could easily drag the world into a nuclear holocaust without being aware what's happening around him or where he is. I mean, I agree with you about the association of old age with senility. That is absolutely ageist and should not be acceptable in the debate. But in the case of Biden, he's shown himself to be mentally incapacitated and incapable of leading the nation or even the world. So I think in the case of Iran, in the last missile attack on Israel by Iran, and they were very precise and they were penetrated the air defenses of Israel, for which taxpayer in America spent so much money, they intimidated Israel and they showed Israel they can hit them anywhere they want. But notice the moral inequivalency between the Arabs, the Iranians, and Israel on the other hand. Notice that the Arab side, I know in the case of Lebanon, the resistance, in the case of Iran, they are not attacking civilians. Israel is a state that specializes as a matter of policy to terrorize the population by deliberately targeting civilians. They have done so in South Lebanon, they have done so in Beirut, in the suburbs. Imagine, this is a state that is willing to flatten 6 residential buildings in order to kill one man. I know of no country in the world that has these standards of lack of ethics, of criminality on a global scale like the state of Israel. And it can only get away with this impunity by virtue of strong American support, unconditional American support.
The United Nations is showing all the signs of the earlier League of Nations, isn't it? Being completely ignored when it makes decisions, or in the case of the ICJ, incapable of responding to judicial decisions of its own court, being insulted, and its officials being routinely murdered and threatened with murder by a state which came into being as a result of a United Nations resolution. What does the UN do about this usurping power that sits in its ranks?
Absolutely nothing, dear Comrade George. I mean, the United Nations, all international organizations, ICJ, ICC, these are all tools used by the United States. I mean, we're talking about the ICC, where they admitted that they were intimidated directly and threatened by the state of Israel. When the ICC wanted to investigate the scale of civilian slaughter by US bombs in Afghanistan, they were threatened by the United States and they were going to arrest them. There is no international law, there's no international legality. And for that, I say, people of the developing countries, they may be better served if they go about their freedom and their struggle with the understanding that the United Nations has absolutely no role. It can only be used when the United States permits it to be used, and only for its own purposes, when they release Security Council resolution that is in the service of Israel. But if it's not to the liking of Israel, they are totally ignored. It's like in 2003, the George Bush administration justified the invasion of Iraq by saying there were United Nations resolutions unimplemented in the case of Iraq, so we want to go there and invade and implement them. But how many resolutions are there between the Security Council and the General Assembly about Israel that are supposedly to discipline Israel, to punish Israel, and they are left unimplemented because the United States won't allow it? We don't live under the lure of justice on a global scale.
Lastly, Prof, I'm going to Kazan in a day or so for the BRICS summit. There will be a lot of Arab leaders there. Some of them are, it would appear, still afraid of Israel. What should I say to them?
I mean, it depends which Arab state we're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about UAE and Saudi Arabia, these are some of the most dictatorial, despotic regimes of the region and of the world, indeed. And yet they are very close allies of Israel. Those people do not speak for the aspiration of the Arab people at all. And during this war, George, I tell you that their media are being used to service the Israeli war effort. They are totally in contradiction with the aspiration and the sentiments of the Arab people, which are totally opposed to the state of Israel. And even public opinion surveys conducted in those countries by Pew, among others, show overwhelming opposition and rejection of the state of Israel by Arab population. 95% of people in Saudi Arabia are opposed to any relations with Israel. Yet, the despotic ruler over there has been continues to negotiate amid all this carnage and genocide with Israel in order to achieve a price, to extract a price from the United States in order to sign a peace treaty with Israel. So basically, personally, I have nothing to say to these people except to abdicate and let the people rule themselves.
Professor, you're a star man. Thanks very much indeed for a dazzling performance.
Thank you very much.
As usual. Professor Asad Abukhalil, professor at California State University. A quick break, and then your calls all the way up to Gayatri's social media review. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Bill Mitchell tweets, "Men aren't afraid of a woman president. We're afraid of an idiot president. And we won't vote for an idiot just because she's a woman." Bill Mitchell, that is the tweet of the night. Who will be the next US president? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? You've got about 20 minutes left to get your vote in. Now, if you want to watch our films, the killings of Tony Blair, Killing Kelly, then that's a bonus if you support us on patreon.com/George Galloway. That is the most efficient way to support the mother of all talk shows. So please, at the end of this show, support us, patreon.com/George Galloway, for the price of a cup of tea in a cafe per week. You can keep these shows going, keep us coming. Ellie is in New York, but wants to talk about Scottish independence. Go ahead, Ellie.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. It's very nice speaking with you.
And you, ma'am?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. You're on the air.
I'm sorry. So, yes, regarding Mr. Salmond's death, my dearest friend was from Glasgow. She was born in the early 50s, actually in the 40s, right after the war. And she died hoping for Scotland's independence. So I understand Mr. Salmond stood up for that, and I do respect that. Of course, the Scottish people went to the ballot, to the polls, and they decided they would stay with England. Okay, so we respect that. But anyway, it's quite a lot for the Scottish people, I think. Next, on U.S. elections, I like to say that, in my opinion, Mr. Garland Nixon is not getting a very good reading of what is happening in the U.S. right now. We have 4 years of Trump in the White House, and he was an absolute disaster. Number one, he increased the national debt by trillions. Number two, he stacked the courts, and since then we have had devastating rulings that affect everyone in the country. And he also opposed to raise the minimum wage. The federal minimum wage stands at $7.25. And he opposed to raise the minimum wage. So next, he killed the immigration bill because he thrives on demonizing immigrants. And then, of course, he transferred the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. And the inflation, he was supposed to raise the interest rate. Obama left him a good economy, but Trump maintained the interest rate negative, below zero, which, of course, now we are seeing a lot of bankruptcies and things going on because with that interest rate being negative, of course, all these corporations loaded up on debt, and now they cannot pay it. So, no, those 4 years of Trump were an absolute disaster. And beyond that, to even have to speak about Trump, it's quite preposterous. This man has
So who are you voting for, Ellie?
Well, decided. There's a lot to say about Obama and a lot to say about Kamala. And but as a woman, I certainly would not vote for this dangerous Vance. I mean, J.D. Vance. It's an absolute disaster. Anybody with decent and just average debating skills would knock him out, okay? Because this person is so ridiculous in argument, in form, and substance. And this guy is asking us to vote for my own destruction. No. I am between a hard place and...
Well, as a woman, Ellie, as a woman and on the subject of destruction, and I infer that you are referring to the abortion question, how do you feel about all the babies and children that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have murdered just in the last 12 months?
It is an absolute disgrace, and of course that is the main issue that keeps me from voting for them. But the Republicans, and especially this man, I am a cat. What is the cat? Lonely woman, or what did he say? The women with no children that love cats. Well, I'm one of those, but I think I am a better person. I have more empathy for someone else's children than he would ever have. To come up with that statement and basically tell billions of people around the world that we are not capable of having appreciation, of having respect for our fellow human beings, it's beyond the pale. So there is no way I would. This is
why not vote for Dr. Jill then with me? My mail-in ballot is already on its way for Dr. Jill Stein. Why not give her your ex?
Well, I will consider. I will, of course, do more research. And at this point, for me, there's only one solution. These Republicans have to reconsider everything they've done, which I don't think they will without an absolute loss. Absolute. It has to resound to the end of the earth, because they have proven what plan they have. They have proven with actions, with policies, that they don't really care about the ordinary people. They are all for life, and then they don't want to raise the minimum wage. How are people that have children supposed to send them to school and provide health care? And no, it doesn't make sense at all. At all.
Yeah, that's why I'm surprised you haven't researched Dr. Jill before now. Hurry up, the election's coming up soon. Ellie in New York, thank you for that. Mary is in Maryland on Trump and Stein. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, hi, how you doing? I think I misunderstood when you said that you were going to, there was a bad choice between Biden and Trump, but you were going to vote for Trump. Am I mistaken?
No, I'm supporting Jill Stein. I have been from the beginning.
Oh, I thought that was what your opinion was, because I researched her when the other two were obviously unable to be voted for, and found that she was excellent. But the trouble is that people like you and the other alternative media are not giving her enough publicity, because people are crying and whining that they only have two choices. They don't even know that there's a third party and probably even a socialist to vote for. So, I mean,
Well, I'm giving her plenty of publicity every single week, twice a week. She's been a guest on our show. We have been singing her praises and virtues from the very beginning, Mary. I'm surprised to hear you say that. What may have confused you is that I said, if not Jill Stein, I hope Trump gets it rather than Harris, because I can look in the crystal ball and see what Trump might do, but I can look in real time at what Harris and Biden are actually doing right this minute. They are slaughtering people. My last caller there was fixated upon J.D. Vance's views on abortion, while you have an administration which is literally slaughtering the innocents in the Holy Land in numbers that Herod could not have dreamt of. That's maybe what confused you, Mary. Last point to you.
Yeah, Jill Stein made it very clear that at least everything she said, she made everything on her platform clear what she would do about every issue that you care about, and every issue she was right on. So I don't know why people won't vote for her. It's ridiculous. We have two choices of two madmen.
Well, I'm fully behind her. You see, you thought we had a disagreement, and we didn't. As Oscar Wilde said, we are two countries divided by a common language. Thanks for that, Mary. Gloria Harper says the British helped liberate the Nazi extermination camps. My uncle was one of the British soldiers. He saw the photos of the horrors that he saw, not only the Russians. Gloria, do some reading. The British liberated one of the refugee camps. The Red Army liberated the rest. Hector Hectorius says either humanity ends Zionism or Zionism will end humanity. Lewis is in my hometown of Dundee and wants to talk about Alex Salmond. Go ahead, Lewis.
Hi, George. It's a pleasure to meet you. I hope you've been well. I wanted to speak about Alex Salmond's very tragic and unfortunate death. I think I pray for Alex's soul. He was a Christian like me, so I pray for him. I pray for his wife Moira, and I pray for the rest of his family. I joined the Alba Party in June this year, chiefly because of Alex's leadership and Alba's stronger independence policies than the SNP. I met Alex 3 times, and I found that he was really sharp, 24/7. He was really sharp. He was really funny, really down to earth. Just overall, an amazing, lovely guy. So it's even for me, it's a very personal tragedy to see him go way too soon.
What do you think will happen to the Alba Party now?
That's the thing. With Alex gone, hopefully the first years of Alba have been able to receive a boost because of experience, and we're able to go from there. But I guess we'll just have to see. I'm still relatively new to the party, so I'm not too familiar with the ins and outs, but I'll be able to participate anyway. But what I wanted to ask you, George, is what do you think will be the legacy of Alex Salmond, the lion, the leader, the man? What will his legacy be?
Well, he had a very high reputation, it would appear, even amongst those who hated him, even amongst those who tried to destroy him. If I look at the front page of the Sunday Mail today and the Sunday Post, as I did, 2 papers that did their best literally to destroy Alex Salmond, they now talk of him in death as a colossus, which shows you that they were always in some awe and in some fear of him. I speak as someone opposed to what you call independence, but I was a close friend of Alex Salmond over many decades because of the many other things that we agreed on and the fact that I admired him as a person greatly. So that will not be forgotten. As I look at what's left of Alba, I must tell you I'm not filled with optimism. Of course, there's not 2 Alex Salmonds anyway, but I don't see anyone yet, maybe wrong, in the second ranks of Alba that will in any way be able to step forward and pick up his mantle. And it doesn't sound like you are aware of anyone either. In some parties, it's kind of obvious who, if the leader falls, who will come next. It isn't in Alba, I must say. But we'll see. Time will tell. Lewis in Dundee, thank you for that. Ali in Denmark on the US and the Middle East. Go ahead, Ali.
Hello, sir. Do you hear me?
Hi. Yes, very clear. Go on.
That's good. Well, first, I want to extend my heartfelt condolences to you and all who support the resistance for the loss of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. I also salute you, sir, for the dedication and your work. And my question is, given the current situation in the Middle East and the role of the Western powers, particularly Israel, the US, and the European Union, what do you think is their broader geopolitical plan in the region, and how do you predict the Middle East will evolve in the next 5 to 10 years? Thank you.
Well, I'm struggling to see a plan, to be honest. Some Smotrich, for example, this week was talking about the greater Israel, taking parts of Egypt, parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria. He said Damascus will be ours. Smotrich again today warned Erdogan that Istanbul will be the capital of the Jews. They are openly talking about God having promised them the land of Egypt, of Palestine, of Lebanon, of Syria, now of Turkey, but also, of course, Saudi Arabia, indeed part of Iraq. The 2 blue lines on the Israeli flag signify the Nile and the Euphrates. The Euphrates, of course, being the major river in Iraq. So some of them are clearly dream of that, but as they are unable to defeat even the guerrillas in Gaza and are getting a bloody good hiding from the Lebanese resistance, it's not at all clear to me how these fantasies could possibly happen. But insofar as there is a plan, I think it's a basic one. Netanyahu wants to drag the United States into a war with Iran. He wants to destroy Iran because the destruction of Iraq did not succeed in neutralizing the threats in the region to Zionist hegemony. They told the Americans that it would. They said that if you destroy Iraq, destroy Saddam Hussein, that amity will break out between the Arab countries and the State of Israel, and the State of Israel will be able to dominate and control the region. Well, none of that, of course, happened. Now he's on repeat. He's saying the same things about Iran. If we can only destroy Iran, amity will break out and everyone will allow Israel, on behalf of the United States, to dominate the region. Well, that's equally as false a promise, in my view. But given what we're watching, both in Gaza and on the Lebanese front, if I were an Israeli leader, I'd be thinking twice about getting into a big war against Iran, because what if the Americans didn't really fully join in? And if they did fully join in, what would Russia and China do? And if they all joined in, what would the final outcome be? If I were an Israeli, I'd be thinking more than twice about that course of action. Ali, thank you for that call from Denmark. Big Basil says, release Jeremy Lofredo. Let him leave Israel and come home. Indeed, that's the grey zone. American journalist being held by Israel. Coffee says, Miriam Adelson is giving Trump over $100 million for the West Bank. She gave him $90 million for East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. I know that, Coffee, but first of all, $100 million is only 10% of a $1 billion election budget. So it's not necessarily the game changer that you think. Secondly, now that he's got it, he doesn't have to give it back. Now that he's got it, if he wins the presidency, he won't be running for another term. So he can tell Miriam Adelson where to stick it. He could put the whole thing on black and even. Robert in Canada on Israel up next. Go ahead, Robert.
Yes, hi, Mr. Galloway. It's an honor to speak to you.
Thank you.
Hello?
Go ahead, sir.
Oh, yeah. So I just wanted to say, it's not so much a question as a comment. I grew up in a world where Israel killing of Palestinians was always seen like basically killing fish in a barrel. It was never a threat. It was easy killings, and too many of them actually seem to find it quite a bit fun. And another thing I have to say is that the Iron Dome was always seen as invincible. So those are two myths that got literally blown up. They've totally been discredited. We live in a totally different world now. So unfortunately, I didn't have a whole lot of hope for the Palestinians. I thought this was going to go on forever. I thought this Iron Dome was invincible. They were untouchable, but it gives hope. I don't like to see Israelis being killed. I don't like to see war. But it was heartbreaking to see that the Palestinians were always getting kicked around. No one was ever coming to really save them, and things are turning around. I finally have hope for them. I know it's war, but it's a nice thing to see that.
Well, the Iron Dome turned out to not be worth a hill of beans. The iron dough, it's being penetrated like a dough nut as we speak. Even drones, never mind ballistic missiles, are too much for it, as a very large number of Israeli forces at dinner in their barracks in Acre just found out in the last hour or two. Great call, Robert. very smart man. Who will be the next US president? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? More than 3/4 of you think it will be Donald Trump, and that's on a poll of 26,734. Now, most of you know I don't just present the mother of all talk shows twice a week. I have a third show called Have It Out with Galloway. And the difference between that show and this is that you get to appear on it on the video wall in person. Take a look. If you want to join me on Have It Out with Galloway, you can be the audience member on that video wall so that I can see as well as hear you. Come and have it out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now here's a message from Ksenia Kazan. I'm so excited to hear you're going to my hometown, George and Gayatri. I met you both in Newcastle 2 years ago when you presented Killing Kelly there. I wish you the best time in Kazan. Thank you very much indeed. We're looking forward to it very much indeed. Gayatri has been busy packing for much of the day. Gayatri, what's rattling on the social media?
How wonderful that we met someone from Kazan,
Yeah.
as we did recently.
As we did in Crawley. Yeah.
So, how wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Me too, Ksenia. I'm also...
Hey, your mic. Where's your mic?
Oh, my mic. My mic. I forgot to put on my mic. Here we go.
Well, she's doing that. Let me read some more. Ben Johnson says, Jill Stein isn't on the poll because it's who will win, not who you want to win. And Denton Fender says, I voted Trump will win, but I would like to see neither candidate win. I'd like to see Dr. Jill Stein for sure. Well, Gayatri is now properly dressed with a microphone. Just repeat what you said about Kazan.
Sorry for that. I was just saying how wonderful it is that we actually met someone from Kazan, as we did recently in Crawley, at our event in Crawley. And yes, Ksenia, looking forward to it. Busy packing. Let's go to the poll. Who will be the next US president? Stephen just wants to check whether this poll is binding, because otherwise we need to let Donald Trump know that he is the chosen one, according to our audience. And Tirla Erwin says, the question should be, who is more likely to rob the election in this bastion of democracy? Bastion of democracy across the pond as well as here. Tim says, at the time of stepping down from the nomination, Biden was dead in the water, and in his brain, by the way, with Harris even less popular than him. But then within days of becoming the nominee, her polling ratings, they just went through the roof, which to me suggests that the deep state actors are about to steal and cheat this election. The mainstream media only give Trump a bad, mad, and sad coverage, whilst putting her forward as if she's the second coming or something.
It hasn't worked though, has it? Anyone who sees her, and it's difficult not to see her, she's had to come out because her ratings were so poor in key demographics and in key swing states. And the more you see of her, the less likely you are to vote for her. So she's more a circus act than the second coming, and more people see that. It's a very big risk to steal the election from Trump again. Of course, they've got the power to do it. They control the counting houses. But I think Donald Trump's going to win a landslide. Not a landslide in the popular vote, but a landslide in the Electoral College. If he wins, as I'm sure he will, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, plus all the traditional red states, he's won the presidency literally by a landslide.
Yeah, he did. Now, obviously, Michigan, one of them, we have discussed how Jill Stein, lots of Arabs living in Michigan will probably vote for Jill Stein because they have seen what Biden-Harris administration have done to their countries of origin. Now, what about this then from Farouk Khan? He says Pakistanis living in the US will vote for Trump as the Kamala Biden regime brought an illegitimate and fascist regime in Pakistan, which has been violating human rights in the last 2 years, killing innocents, abducting political workers, and threatening judges. So this minority, ethnic minority
good point.
cohort,
I never thought of that.
Yes, cohort could be very
There's a lot
important.
of Pakistanis in the US.
There are. So let's see, Mr. Farouk Khan. Now, Enrique says, so Trump says that if he's elected, he would stop the war in Ukraine. But what if Russia doesn't want to? I mean, they're winning and making huge gains. So why doesn't the West ever take into account what Russia might think? It's always disregarded. Anyway, great show, he says.
Well, good point. Russia doesn't want it to end unless on the terms they set when they embarked upon the war. They need freedom for the Russian-speaking people of eastern Ukraine. They need a cast iron guarantee that not only will Ukraine not join NATO, but that NATO will be nowhere present ever again in Ukraine. And they need an end to the ultra-nationalist stroke Nazi, fascist, extremists that are around Zelensky. So these are their war aims, and I don't think they're going to stop the war before realizing them. And I think their war aims have probably expanded, given the price they've had to pay in their own blood, in their own treasure, in their own relations with Western countries. They have completely been betrayed by Western countries who've stolen their money in the hundreds of billions of dollars that were foolishly banked with or accessible to the Western financial empire. So I would have thought their war aims are very much greater now than they were at the beginning. I think they will not stop the war until they have Finlandized the rump state of Ukraine that would remain. And I don't think they'll stop the war without liberating Odessa and linking up with Transnistria, leaving the rump state of Ukraine entirely landlocked. That's just my guess. I'll be in a better position once we're in Kazan.
Once we're there.
To know more.
Yes, 3 final comments. One from Mickey Tracy. He says, I thought the UK candidates were depressing, but these two are like voting for your favorite guest at the end of a 6-month Jerry Springer series. Either way, Israel, Russia wins and World War III looms. Very funny that...
I knew Jerry Springer, by the way.
Yes.
Jerry Springer brought me
Mayor
to
Springer.
breakfast in the Dorchester in London. He was actually a very savvy guy, very political guy.
Yeah.
He destroyed his political career by visiting a prostitute and paying for her by check.
Oh my goodness.
He wasn't that smart.
So Albizu Vive is asking, George, please tell me, what's the difference between Keir Starmer and his storied predecessor, Rishi Sunak, Bojo, Theresa May? I don't see it.
He's the worst. Starmer is by far the worst of all of these. And the rate he's going, he'd be worse than Badenoch and Jenrick, who are the final two in the opposition ballot. He's the worst prime minister we've ever had, and I include Liz Truss in that equation.
I saw that. I saw a tweet of someone saying, we owe Liz Truss an apology for calling her the worst prime minister.
We'd be better off with that lettuce that outlived Liz Truss's prime ministership. Unfortunately, Starmer's made it to 100 days. It's been 100 days of unparalleled disaster.
Misery. Finally, Lee says, lovely tribute to Alex George and more power to you for naming and shaming the pygmies who stabbed him in the back and front. These people would be nowhere in politics if it wasn't for him. Rest in peace, Alex Salmond.
You ain't seen nothing yet. David Davis, the Right Honourable David Davis, a remarkable fellow, a fellow of great integrity. He's on the case, and he isn't going to stop until there's justice for Alex Salmond. He was a close friend of Alec, as was I, but he's got the power of parliamentary privilege that I do not have. Look out for some real fireworks on the Alex Salmond affair coming from the Right Honourable David Davis.
Very good.
Soon. Thank you, Gayatri. I'll take you for chips before we head off to the land of no chips in Russia. Mark is in Oregon in the US, born in 1945, and could see flashes of the A-bomb tests from his back garden. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, George. You're the mother of all talk shows for sure. You know, the story...
Thank you.
I don't think I saw the flashes from Nevada, but we expected to. And the dads, 3 or 4 dads in the backyard with us, we were 7 and 8 years old, were excited about the A-bombs. These guys were World War II veterans, and we were all excited about America developing this weapons technology. And, in the mid-50s, we were cowering under desks at school. Russian hordes were to be swarming onto Oregon beaches if this nuclear technology wasn't developed. And now here we go again. I'll be 80 in a few months, and here we are with the Ruskies on their way to Paris and then Pittsburgh. And I guess they're not going to come onto Oregon beaches. They're going to come from the east to get us. And it's just, man, it is the same story over again. So anyway, the other point is...
Some things never change, Mark.
It just goes on and on. But anyway, the second point I want to make is I'm looking forward to Musk getting to the moon and getting to the bottom of the Apollo story. So anyway, thanks, George. You're the best.
Well, that would be interesting indeed. I don't know if he's got his sights set on the moon. He's got an appointment with me in a Dublin courtroom before that. But I'll pass on your thoughts to him. Mark in Oregon, nearly 80, proving the age hath not withered him. Denton Fender says, I voted Trump will win, but I'd like to see another candidate. I'd like to see Jill Stein. Nelson Ortega says, Cornel West is the best candidate for president, and even Jill Stein knows that. She's just a name and a face for the Green Party. Cornel West is for the people. Vote Looney OMRLP says, sack the floor manager. Microphones. I wish we had a floor manager. This is a mom and pop operation.
With me.
With my grandchildren answering the phones. A floor manager? Who's going to pay for a floor manager? I bet you haven't even signed up to support me for the price of a cup of tea on Patreon yet. Last call. It's the legend, Erobos in New York on Obama. I'm looking forward to hearing this. Go ahead, Erobos.
Salubrious late evening. The one and mighty great George Galloway and his fantastic wife, who is in a school teacher mode, the wonderful audience of MOATS. And, as Morpheus told Neo in The Matrix, time is always against us, so I shall press on. Now, in the last line of the magnificent poem of, what is her face here? Maya Angelou, Still I Rise. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. Now, the part that people don't consider, and I just recently considered it this past week, is they don't talk about what type of slave, because there were 2 types of slaves. There was the one in the house, who we refer to here as the house Negro, and then there's the one in the field slave. And Barack Obama, and what brought me to this is actually your guy there, the one that you aptly refer to as the British Idi Amin, who says that there is no freedom of speech, but I cannot guarantee freedom after speech. And I might have butchered that quote. Yeah, he was like,
No,
yeah,
he
there's
didn't.
freedom of speech, but I cannot guarantee freedom after speech. You know, that guy. The problem with Obama and David Lammy and people like this is that they represent the ideal perfection of the perfect slave, right? And this is why weaponized identity politics is something as a core value, I am against, wholly against. Identity politics has its place, but when it's weaponized, where you have black skins and white masks, you have people that look like us, and the whole, spectrum of identity, whether it be LGBTQ plus or BIPOC or whatever, these are the people now that are carrying out the same Anglo-supremacist, white supremacist policies that we've been fighting against for hundreds of years. It's just now they say it's someone like you that's doing it to us. And this is why the Democratic Party as an enterprise has to be destroyed first, because it's easier to deal with the Republicans. We already know who they are. They're easily identified, and they don't hide who they are. But the Democratic Party, it's a clear and present danger. And people like Obama, David Lammy, and all of these Uncle Tom house Negroes, they're the greatest danger and threat to us immediately. We can't do anything in our communities with these people in office at all. So I just wanted to share that perspective. And David Lammy, give me a break.
Yeah, I think it was probably Idi Amin that said there'll be no guarantee of freedom after speech, rather than David Lammy, but it could equally have been said by David Lammy, a robust, the legend in New York, bringing the show to a close with his characteristically frank and brilliant observation on Barack Obama. Barack Obama came out this week to try to get the black American men back on the plantation, the Democratic Party's plantation. But he failed because the worm has turned. The slave has stood up. The slave can see clearly that Obama freed himself, but he didn't free anybody else. Obama and Big Mike, his good wife, and their daughters have a wonderful life. But the average African American, the average American, has far from that. Barack Obama killed a lot of folks. He tortured a lot of folks. He promised that he would close Guantanamo where they were torturing these folks, but he never did. He never stopped the wars. He accelerated them. He multiplied them. The reason I'm so particularly bitter about him is because I met him once. And as we marched through the streets of Washington, D.C., down to the White House together, he was a junior congressman, local congressman in Chicago at that time. We talked. We talked about his mentor and one of my heroes, Professor Edward Said. And it became abundantly clear on the slow march that there was nothing that Barack Obama did not know about the Middle East. He didn't have the alibi that George W. Bush did of being an imbecile. Barack Obama was a very clever and highly educated man. And he came to power when the US economy was lying on the floor, murdered by the US banks and the financial system. He came to power when America was embroiled in a series of unwinnable and unjustifiable wars. And he continued them. He picked Wall Street up and put it back on its feet and allowed them to keep their ill-gotten gains. He allowed them to stay in control of the economy. He continued the wars. He multiplied them. He sent cruise missiles across the world, murdering even American citizens. Barack Obama did very well. He has a property empire in Hawaii, in the Hamptons, in New York City and in Chicago, worth the best part of $100 million. The Clintons, the Obamas, enriched themselves, ensconced themselves in the house, in the big house, the big antebellum house with the pillars outside. Frankly, my dear, Barack Obama doesn't give a damn about you, and you shouldn't give a damn about his voting instructions. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I enjoyed presenting it. By Wednesday, we might be in the big war, but even if we aren't, you need to come back here to understand in this University of the Airwaves what's really going on. Good night.